I wasn't real happy with the sheath that came with this Leatherman ARC. It was way too big and kind of universal fit, super sloppy in there, kind of bulky, and so I decided to make my own out of leather. I also like carrying something parallel to the belt instead of perpendicular, and so I just thought I would show really quick what I'm doing in case anybody wants to replicate this. And if you're seeing this video, then I'll also show you what it looks like at the end. So basically I'm just going to do this in millimeters. So I have one piece, which is 90 millimeters by about 70 or so. And then I have another flap, which is going to be more than my caliper can show. So that's 150 plus 50. So basically 200 from here to the hole. And basically the way this is going to work is I'm just going to sew this like so, and then that'll loop around. A lot of times these buttons are enough to hold it in place. You could also add a little strap. I don't think I'll need to do that. But working with leather is a really great skill to develop. You don't need a lot of tools. One of the only tools you absolutely have to have is an awl. It doesn't have to be one from Osborne, even though they're kind of the big name in leather tools. Any awl will do. Something like this is really useful because you can score the edge. So what I'll normally do is I will score the edge like this, make a little scratch, and then you have this little wheel, which is kind of like a spur. You can get different spur intervals, and you run this along and you make little tiny tick marks, and those tick marks are very evenly spaced. And then you use this awl and you poke the holes, and then you do the sewing. And you can do the sewing really with any needles. Very often leather work is done with blunt needles, but I like to sharpen them. Just put them in a drill and sharpen them a little bit, makes them go through easier. And some thread. You can find all this kind of stuff at like Tandy Leather. I don't like going through a lot of dress work on the edges. I think that makes it look, I don't know, a little less raw and too fancy for my style. And cutting the leather out, you can really do with, you know, a steel ruler and some sort of utility knife. You can use something as flimsy as this. I have leather cutting knives. I have all kinds of knives, and honestly, any sharp knife will do. One technique with cutting leather, though, is to make several, like, don't try and cut through the leather in one pass. Try and do it in like 5 passes, because the harder you push down, the more the whole thing deforms and gets squirrely, and then you won't get a straight cut. Plus, as you push down really hard, you're more likely to slip and cut yourself. So just do a bunch of light passes. I don't normally use this knife to cut leather because it's pretty on the flimsy side, but if this is all I had, it's more than adequate. You really don't need that many tools. There's a lot of tools for sale. A lot of them are to make it look more decorative, but if you're a guy and you're doing something that's kind of more raw and rugged and utilitarian, then you don't want it too dressed up. So I'll put out a couple videos on leather. I've made probably 40 items out of leather. Nothing humongous, but lots of really useful things. And it's a cool material to have around the house. I used to buy my scrap leather, or I used to buy Saddleback Leather's scrap leather. He used to sell it. He doesn't anymore. But go to Saddleback Leather and check out their products. And if that kind of stuff interests you, then you can get full grain leather from Tandy. And you can make some really cool stuff that doesn't have to look homemade and hokey. So I'll show you the product here at the end. Trick I learned the hard way is once you've scored the edge, just so that you have a visual marking and you go to run the spurs, do not start at one side and go clear through to the other. The reason you don't want to do that is you might end in a very odd location. Like you may end with your last hole like right there, which is too close to the edge without tearing out the side. But if you were to go back one, it's too far away from the edge and doesn't look right. So what I like to do is I like to take the same dimension, that I did here, and I like to come in that amount, and that becomes my first hole right there. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side, in this case, it's a radius corner that I'm going to clean up later, but if you were going, let's say, from here to here, you start with one perfectly in the corner, one perfectly in the corner, and then you come in from this side and come in from this side. And then as you're getting close to the middle, if you see that you're going to have two that are too close to each other, you can just kind of split the difference. And your eye is much less likely to see sort of a spacing, which is like 3/4 or half of one increment, versus starting here and moving all the way over and then getting a really ill-placed hole at the end. So start at your corners, work in, and then sort of finesse in the middle the spacing if it's not just right. So the tricky part about sewing kind of a cavity like this, which in the end will be a holster, is if you were to stitch all of this, it's then really too tight to reach down in and do the stitching on this side. So you got to kind of do both sides at the same time. So you end up using 4 needles, and I heated these and bent these so they can sneak around corners a little bit easier. And you kind of leave everything loose for a little while until you get so far up that you can kind of pull it all tight and taut along the way. But I did something like this before. It took me ages because there was a lot more to do. But you kind of just got to do it at the same time because you'll never get your fingers down in there. So work nearly done. It's super tedious work, by the way, if you're ever doing this. It's just, it's kind of a lot to manage. 4 needles and the pattern and the rhythm. And there's even little details that sometimes I just don't have the patience for. Like when you do these crisscrosses, I like to always do the one that goes from left to right, that's on top, and the one going to left to right to left is underneath. Little details like that can improve the look of the whole thing. But sometimes you make a mistake and you don't realize it, and it's like 4 stitches back, and you just say, screw it. So, but that's kind of a couple things you can do to kind of take your stitching to the next level. You can see that little loop in there, that's for the belt loop. I'm about ready to put the second one on, and to get all of this lined up, it's real tedious, but it's pretty rewarding. And you know, a nice leather sheath, I think the one from Leatherman is like 60 bucks, and you may not like the style as much, that's fine, but the quality of this leather is on par with what's being sold by Leatherman. And I think I used to buy a 5-pound bag of leather for 25 bucks, so this is probably like 90 cents worth of leather and a button and 2 rivets. So I mean, it's like the cost is like $1 maybe. But yeah, it's rewarding, interesting, satisfying. We're kind of in the winter here in Chattanooga almost, and so it's dark at like 7 o'clock. So if you're used to being outdoors and you can't do as much of that in the colder months, it's nice to have a hobby. And I know sewing and all of that is not a super manly thing, but doing leather stuff, I don't know, it's a little different. And there's a lot of cool small things you can make to improve or optimize or fix things around the house. And having a leather skill is pretty handy. I've used it a lot over the years, so I'll show it to you now here. All right, all done. So stitching this and stitching this, you can see it's only my finger length. That took me probably 90 minutes. It's just very tedious to be down in there with 4 needles and threads. I've already said that a few times, sorry, I'll stop saying it. Yeah, this is a parallel carry, so it sits on the belt like that. I like that a little bit better than that one. And overall, I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out. This cut is actually from saddleback leather. That's how you get scraps. I used to be able to get scraps from them, and that just happened to be the end of the scrap, and I thought, well, that looks all right. I might cut it like that, but I kind of like it. So yeah, it's just a really tight fit. It's almost too tight, but the leather will stretch a little bit. And I just didn't like the original sheath that came with it. It was just super sloppy and way bigger than it needed to be because it's for a bunch of other multi-tools as well. So yeah, if you're not into leather but you have interest, I would say jump in. It's relatively low cost. I mean, it's certainly cheaper than woodworking. You don't need a sewing machine. You just need some hand tools, and it's a fairly manly thing, at least if you're the kind of guy who's a little embarrassed to run a sewing machine and then show it off to your buddies. But yeah, hopefully that was interesting or helpful to someone, give you an idea, and if not, that's fine. give this video a thumbs down so I know. And head on over to Leatherman's website and buy one of these arcs and enjoy the useless sheath that comes with it. No, I'm just kidding. Last thing I was going to say, I did burnish the edges. I do like burnishing them. So burnishing is basically kind of like a heat treatment, if you will. They make a bunch of different tools. You can buy something that kind of has like these grooves in it, and you kind of rub it back and forth really fast like that to burnish the edge or kind of heat the edge. You can improve it even more by putting some wax on there, like candle wax. You kind of rub it on there and then you burnish. I have a little attachment that I built for my lathe, and really anything you can do to motorize the burnishing process, whether it's to put it in a drill chuck or drill press or something like that. Burnishing really happens as a function of heat, and that heat comes in through friction, and you'll get a lot more friction if you're not doing it by hand, but you're doing it with some sort of rotary motorized thing. So yeah, that's how I like to treat my edges. If you don't treat your edges like that, they're just a little bit more raw. So quick example. So this is burnished and then this is not. So it's just a little more fuzzy, and it's a little bit more of like a 90-degree, whereas this gets a slight rounded over, and I just like it in the end. It doesn't get as many frays all over the place. So, all right, folks, take care.